On this episode of the Totum Wellness Podcast, we're welcoming Nicole Springle. Nicole is a registered dietitian, a sport dietitian, and has helped many Canadian Olympians achieve their dreams. We're going to be talking about nutrient deficiency and strategies to correct them, top components to sport and high-performance nutrition, as well as finding out what proper nutrition actually looks like on your plate. Nicole, welcome to the Totum Wellness Podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Great to have you here. And I'd like to open talking about two of your loves. One's the beach and one's cooking. And do you combine those two or?
Whenever possible. Actually, I think I have done some nutrition demos on the beach with the athletes.
Seriously?
So yeah, little like snack demos and whatnot. But
podcast
Do you have
ever.
like a little bit of a hibachi or that sort of thing? Like down there, are you grilling?
Yeah. No, I wish. But we would sometimes do like trail mixes or energy bites or something kind of simple that we could do off-site, out of the kitchen. So, you know, they're on the beach all day. So sometimes you got to get creative.
Well,
my
and I
God, I
imagine
love
given
this.
what you do, you're an incredible nutritionist, dietitian, sport focused, and your love of cooking and food, you get to experiment a lot with and making things taste great for high performance.
Yeah. And that's actually what got me into doing nutrition was I was such a foodie and I loved food. But then, you know, doing sport, you start to realize like, okay, there's certain things you've got to pay attention to. But I was like, I'm not the girl who's going to throw a bunch of scoops of protein powder in and chuck, something back. I was like, no, this needs to taste good. And so, so I kind of use the same logic with my athletes. It's like, you know, we want to eat like normal people. And yeah, it's not all about popping pills and powders. Like you can get good nutrition, enough of your macros, all the things you need out of real food. And so that's kind of my focus whenever I work with athletes.
And presumably with these are busy athletes, and there are tons of training time. They require huge volumes of food.
Yeah.
They're probably, and you can let us in on maybe a couple secrets on how do you do it more simplistically and efficiently so it's not a big deal and you might avoid it if it does become a big deal.
Yes, we generally have the like 5 ingredient rule where like if recipes
Right.
are over,
That makes
5
sense.
ingredients, it's a no-go. And for a lot of the athletes, it was actually a learning curve for me coming in because again, I loved to cook. So I'd, spend an hour making a meal and, the idea of spending more than like 10 minutes on food when they're so tired, they're sore.
Mhm.
I mean, I also work in track cycling where the like amount of energy that goes into like their legs and they are just so fatigued. So asking them to stand at a stove, they're like, no, like I'll give you 5 minutes and that's about
Wow.
it. So
That
you
is
really learn.
fascinating.
Yeah, you really learn you have to get like quick, easy, nutritious, lots of calories packed into the meals and good nutritional value and something really, really quick
That
and
is
easy.
amazing.
So there's lots of challenges outside of just, the macros and the nutrition
For
portion
sure.
of it. You've got to find things that work for the athletes too, or they won't do it.
You worked with two of our favorite Olympians, Sophie Bukovic and Heather Bainsley.
Yes,
And
two of my favorites too.
they were on the podcast last season.
Season 2. Check it out.
Yes, check it out. It is great. I was so impressed with them because they were so into food.
Yeah.
And now I know that you're responsible for that. But in all seriousness, I really do find the athletes that I work with, and whether it's in a rehab setting or coaching, they are not as concerned about what their food tastes like. They're not as concerned about entertaining. They're not as concerned about the things. Then when Sophie and Heather came in, they were talking about all these things and they were talking about actually cooking and actually having friends over. And I think Heather, like that was her favorite downtime activity was to make meals and eat meals with friends. And I think that was the first time I heard that from an Olympian.
Yeah.
And I was so impressed. So hats off to you, because I'm a true believer that we actually absorb more from our food if we enjoy the whole process, whether that's putting it together or eating it with friends. I think just being relaxed. So can you tell us like a few things? How do you get the athletes to start thinking like that?
So yeah, I definitely agree. And as I mentioned, I'm a big foodie, so I always say you eat with your eyes first. And so Heather was one of the athletes. I had the opportunity in 2016 to go down to the Rio Olympics and cook for the beach volleyball team there. So Heather was one of our athletes then, and it was just so fun because the beach athletes, they actually, a ton of them are foodies. I mean, athletes are people, right? So you have your eat to lives and then you have your live to eats.
They are definitely that because you know what else? They remember when they were on their social media in Paris, they were doing all this food stuff. Like they were going to all the food trucks and tasting things. They are foodies.
Yeah.
That's
so
fun.
I actually really loved cooking for them because of that. Because I loved putting the stuff out and presenting it, and they would come in and they'd get so excited about it. And it's nice because the games are so high pressure and there's so much going on. And, to give them like that little bit of joy to come in and have a nice meal, and we'd turn the lights down and put music on and create an ambiance, and it was actually a lot of fun. And it was one of the things, probably some of the best feedback I got from that was they were just so happy to have someone there who could cater to them instead of going to this big dining hall where it's super overwhelming and they don't know what to choose, or there's so much decision fatigue. It's these little things that people don't realize about going to a game, like a huge games like the Olympics, is they're under so much stress. And now, when you're stressed and you're putting 15 different options in front of you and you're like, I don't want to choose. Just somebody give me these things. And so, it was one of the little things that I really didn't appreciate until I had gotten that feedback. It was just nice to know I'd made it something easier for them in a, a really high pressure, high stress situation. So.
Is there any examples? What would be your go-to things that you would make in a setting like that?
So oftentimes, bowls were huge because, again, every athlete has kind of different energy needs and different ways they like to meet those. So I found when you can kind of give different options around, have a couple different grain options and a couple different proteins, and then, you put out a whole bunch of veggies, and that way everyone kind of gets to choose their portions and also what they're having. So oftentimes, and that's what we look for generally when we're looking at catering menus or anything for a game situation or a camp, is just the ability for the athletes to have choice and not too many mixed dishes. So it just allows them to cater everything individually, and then they can make better choices instead of a casserole where suddenly everything's lumped together and you're, and I think with the number of, the number of allergies and preferences, it just makes it really difficult. So we just try to make it as easy as possible for each of them to individualize their needs.
Prior to us starting recording, you were mentioning that some younger athletes, and whether it's high school or university, they really have poor knowledge, even though they're high performance athletes. So the education has a ways to go yet. Are there one or two specific things that are the biggest gaps for those younger athletes?
Interestingly, what I found is it's cooking skills. And so, they get a basic knowledge of kind of food and nutrition. So a lot of them in school. But one of the things that's never taught is cooking skills. So I actually find that the teenage athletes generally have pretty good eating because they're at home and they're getting fed. Right. The challenge is as soon as they go to university. Right. And I'm seeing this now working more in the varsity sport population, is just these kids are, they're time stressed, they're running from classes, they're, going to practices. And as soon, again, first year they might be okay because they have a meal plan. As soon as they move out, just
second year.
Yeah. And food costs right now, they can't even afford to eat out. So now they're just eating, cereal and toast and can't really don't have the capabilities to cook. So part of it is the practical pieces. And then I find the other is kind of the more sport specific knowledge. So again, they may know carbs and proteins and all of that. And there's so much information, out on social media and everything. So they're just getting all of these mixed messages. Yeah. And sometimes it's just coming back to the basics of being you got to eat real food. You got to eat regularly. You want to eat before and after your training. You don't want to skip meals. You got to make sure you got enough carbs, proteins, fats. So it's just bringing them back to some of the basics and getting them out of the noise that's out there.
Well, no, there's so much data. It's just everywhere. Do it this way. Do it that way. Do it a combination of those two ways to the nth degree, right? And it is very confusing. That's one of the reasons we started doing this podcast, is try to cut through all that information that's out there. And a lot of it's really good now. It's applicable, but it's applicable in this sliver of a situation as opposed to you're just missing the whole picture.
Yeah. And that's the thing is sometimes they can get so lost in the details and you're like, just come back to the foundations. Like eat real food, eat regularly and eat enough. That's a huge part of it for the athletes that I work with is just getting enough food in and getting that message out there. Like you need to fuel your body and, you can work your macros all you want, but if you're not getting enough fuel, like you're not building muscle, you're not recovering properly, and you're not going to get any better.
It was interesting as Sophie had said that exact thing, that she was fatigued all the time. She just thought she was training really hard. And well, it must have been you that said you're short on carbohydrates. There's
always, one macro that tends to be the bad one, the anti-nutrient. But except when you're a high performance athlete, they're really important. So so it's constantly kind of coming back to that messaging and educating athletes on, your needs are going to be different than, some of the other people who you hang around with and the rest of the population. And like, you really need to be aware of that. So so a lot of it comes down to educating and then helping them to kind of get it in a practical manner.
Do you think that our scheduling with these athletes will ever come around to make their lives a little bit better and a little bit easier when it comes to food? Because I'm just thinking about what you're saying. And we have, our daughter is in second year at McGill University and she's a soccer player for that team. She said exactly what you're talking about because she'll go to class all day. Then she has a practice that will take up about 2.5 hours, like shower, meetings, all that kind of thing. She will get home around 9 p.m. She's exhausted. And it was interesting when she came, she just had her week off. And she said one of the most favorite things that she got to do was sleep in. And then the other thing was not have to cook food. And she actually said, I just hate it at the end of the day. And she really does eat healthy and she really does try. And we obviously have lots of resources and she's met with nutritionists and she knows what to do. She just finds that she's so tired. And then we're kind of in her ear saying, if you don't eat, you won't get results. Your training won't be as beneficial if you don't sleep. But we're also bugging her about sleep. I'm like, you have to have 8 hours minimum, maybe 9. And I can tell she's just really overwhelmed. And I feel like so many athletes in our society, like even my high school kids are exactly the same. They'll go right from school to their sport and they're exhausted. And then we'll train and then they have to study for an exam. And I don't know when they're going to eat. They're at least having food. I've had them phone home before and ask their moms, like we'll be trying with something. They'll be like, Mom, I need you to make me a steak for tonight. Like they'll do it right at practice, which is adorable. And at least they have that option, but the university kids don't. Like, do you think it will ever change or what are you doing to help them manage that?
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see this change, but it comes down more to a systemic and primarily a funding issue. So if you look at, say, like NCAA schools in the States,
right?
They have food programs and they have huge cafeterias where the athletes are going directly after training. And they can get their recovery snacks, they can get their, all their food, and it's all covered as part of the program. But that's a big funding window.
Absolutely.
So
that is fascinating because now that you said that, I'm like, of course, their facilities, their tutors, they're everything. And our athletes are competing kind of in the same realm as they are, but being treated completely differently.
Yeah. So I think something really has to change systemically, to be able to provide that. And I mean, even working at the national level, like you'd think that these athletes would be taken care of. They're working with the same challenges that I see in the varsity athletes too. They usually have a little bit more time on their hands because they're not always in classes.
They're not working. Yeah.
But again, they're fatigued. They need these athletes need like 8 to 12 hours of sleep a day. And it's really challenging. So a lot of my work with them ends up being like, how do we batch cook, freeze things in advance, like how can we make this as easy as possible, and use the time that you have off. So like on a weekend when you do have some time, like let's make a week's worth of meals, put some in the freezer, cook up some.
Smart.
And then, so it's strategies like that, let's make sure your grocery shopping is done so you're not having to run back and forth. And then sometimes it's like, how about HelloFresh? How about options? It's like,
Yes. 'Cause some days you need that.
Yeah. I remember one of my cyclists was in med school and training for the Olympics. And she was like, I just feel bad because I'm ordering food. I was like, this is absolutely a pass for you. Yeah. So, so I also say, like, don't feel bad if you have to take shortcuts. Like the important thing is you're fueling your body. And if it's, not a absolutely like fresh homemade meal, like that's okay. There's a lot of challenges here. And like you said, there's other things that are really important, your stress level, your sleep, all of that. So nutrition is one component, but it's only one, and I'm saying that as someone who, really vouches for nutrition, but I've worked in high performance for, over 10 years. And you see, it's not the be all end all. You've got to put it in context with other priorities too.
I'd love to ask you a specific question about power development and nutrition around that, specifically protein, because I know in one of our conversations, this came up as a topic. And obviously it's a very specific piece, but it fascinated me that there's like an actual nutritional requirement to train for power versus maybe cardio endurance or something like that.
So when it comes to overall protein requirements, it definitely depends on like age and stage and athlete development, and then kind of type of sport. For the general population, and I'm going to talk in some numbers only to put some context. It don't make too much sense to most people, including me. But they say like for the RDA, or for what most people need in protein a day, is 0.08 grams per kilo of your body weight. Okay. And that's the general population. Now, when we move into athletes, we're talking in the range of like double that. So 1.6 grams all the way up to like 2.2. So I mean, I know grams, per kilo doesn't make too much sense, but it just gives you an idea. Like the protein needs for anyone looking to develop muscle are a lot higher. Now, endurance athletes tend to be on that lower range of the spectrum, but definitely our strength and power athletes and anyone looking to put on lean mass and develop power, you're going to be wanting to kind of sit on the higher end. Interestingly, for adolescent athletes, they tend to be a little bit on the lower end just because their bodies are really good at developing and taking in food and using protein effectively. So that was something that people are sometimes, shocked with. And then conversely, masters athletes actually are much more on the higher end because as we get older, we're not quite as good at
not as efficient.
Exactly.
Metabolizing it and using it properly.
Yeah, and we want to look at like maintaining muscle and it's just a little bit tougher as we age. And then one of the other kind of categories that it really needs a lot more protein are anyone who's in a caloric deficit. So all of our weight class athletes, we always were targeting higher. Or again, if an athlete was, looking at leaning down for a competition or something, so body composition changes, always targeting higher protein intakes because of the caloric deficit. But it's interesting. Most of the research where athletes, even well-trained athletes, are in like a caloric balance, so they have enough calories, it actually bumps down to closer to 1.6. And after that, it doesn't, extra protein doesn't really matter. But it's interesting because, it's kind of, again, the carbs are out, protein is in. So everybody's, protein crazy. Yeah. But, as we're talking about these grams per kilo, when you actually look at an athlete's diet, I have to do this all the time. I'm, educating a lot of the varsity athletes right now. Like it's really not hard to get that much protein in your diet. So we work with, again, speaking practically, we work with plate models. So for anyone listening, you can, Google athlete plates, and that's kind of our practical tool. And it's tried, tested, and true. And we're like, we use this. Every international dietitian probably has their version. But we kind of just show, a plate and show it divided in quarters or half or whatever, depending on the, what the athlete's day looks like. If you're doing a rest day, a single training day, a double day. And what I always show athletes, and I have these in presentations all the time, is for like an intense day, half of the plate would be, what do you think?
Carbs.
Exactly. So most athletes are like, protein. Like, no, it's like half of your plate needs to be carbohydrates. You're doing 2 training sessions a day, or you're in a competition. Yes, this is what your body needs, right? Yeah. And then I love showing them because, I'll show them a day where it kind of matches this and show them like actual food. And then, I calculate the protein, and it never fails. Every time I do this, I, do a sample day and I calculate the protein needs. As long as you're basically over about 2,500 calories and your plate is half carbohydrates, it comes out to about 2 grams per kilo in protein.
Perfect.
Yeah. So again, everyone goes crazy with the amount they think they need to have in protein. And that's half your plate carbs and a quarter of your plate protein, and then vegetables too. Those are important.
Vegetables.
So-
And would the vegetables count as the carbs, or is that?
Yeah. So they'll have some carbohydrate in there as well. But, we, in terms of like how we show the half plate, it's, that's your fruits, your grains, your like more dense carbohydrate foods.
And that, I love the resource athlete plates. So Google athlete plates.
Yeah.
And is it for general population who want to kind of understand what good nutrition is, maybe not necessarily for them as a non-athlete or a retired athlete. I put myself in that category.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing to have a look at for just general population?
It's actually, I say it's a really good resource in general, because as you move down, so that's your hard, we call it like, the hard training day plate. You have a moderate training day plate, which is like pretty much it's an hour of activity. So if you're if you're an
most
active
people
adult,
should be getting that.
Yeah. Then that plate looks like a third a third of everything, pretty much.
A third of carbs, third of protein, and a third of vegetables.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And then when you move into like, more sedentary, person, or we call it like the light training day. So maybe it's an office day, right? You walk from the subway to your office or whatever. Then it's half a plate of vegetables, because again, our carb needs aren't quite as high. And actually, if you look at even the new food guide, that's really what
It's a really good way to understand it.
Yeah, they've got.
If we can't have you in our house and helping us.
Because that question's coming up if you're interested in moving in for a while.
I'm still fantasizing about that, and I'm still fantasizing about cooking on the beach. Those things aren't available. We're going to then try our bowls. What would we cook on the weekend? And assuming we have no allergies, we like all food. What would be kind of like your top 5 go-to proteins? And then what's your favorite carbs in our bowls? And then assuming vegetables are like the more variety, the better.
Yeah.
So what are our top proteins and carbs, and like how do we do that in an easy, practical way?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So again, it definitely is going to depend on the person in terms of like, how I would individually recommend this. But I'm a big fan of variety. So I would say if you're going for proteins, like, let's get our omega-3s in. So if you have the capacity to do some fatty fish, like a salmon or something like that, that's a great way to do it. And with a lot of my athletes, the other issue is budget. It's huge for a lot of the student athletes.
Yeah.
So, I always say, I'm like, canned salmon is a great option.
So smart.
What is that?
Canned.
Yeah.
So smart. We kind of just
great
got our
idea.
kids onto that too. Like just saying like, you can just do this, put a bit of mayo in.
Do some like salmon cakes, anything like that.
Yeah.
Like if you can, because
with canned.
And salmon, I mean, in our Western culture, we're not as big on things like sardines and anchovies, but if you can get into it, like these are super high in omega-3s, like really small fish. So very low mercury, like content. So things like that are really cost effective and really great. And then if not, I always say frozen fish, like go with options like that, because they're going to keep, so, and again, depending on budgets, then you can go all the way up to your, fresh fish and other options. But so I think fish is a really great one that I try to encourage athletes to get in where they can. And then, speaking on athletes and nutrient needs, iron is huge.
Yes.
So getting some red meats in are really important. So whatever that looks like, if it's ground beef is a big one for most of the student athletes, because again, not too expensive, and you can cook up large batches of it and it stays great. So that might be your, another protein choice. And then, it could be something like a chicken or something, and I'll get them to, again, buy a whole chicken and cook that up, or the rotisserie chickens. Those things are amazing. Because for most people, they're a little high in sodium. For athletes, they need salt. So that becomes a really easy one, because you can take that home and suddenly, you've got chicken for the week.
Okay, grains. I'm assuming we're not doing like white rice. We're maybe not doing as much, or are we?
Interestingly,
what do you like?
Yeah. So again, all that we kind of get the bad rap in the nutrition world. In the world I work with, digestion matters.
Okay.
And speed of digestion matters. So for a lot of my athletes, because of the volume of carbohydrate they're taking in, a lot of times they do better with like white rice and some of the more simple carbohydrates, especially like depending on timing.
The volume of like on a really hard workout day, maybe we go with more of that.
And we also know that in terms of glycogen recovery, or the where our blood sugar is stored as glycogen around the muscle. And so that's what our muscle pulls from. And so if I have athletes doing a double day, we know that glycogen generally takes almost 24 hours to recover, unless you're really on top of your carbohydrate intake in that kind of recovery window. So, and in that time, we also know that more simple carbohydrates can actually improve glycogen storage because they move into the system faster. So if we have a short recovery window, like if an athlete is doing a morning session and they have to be ready for an afternoon session, it's simple. White rice. Get it in right afterwards.
That's really smart.
And then that way it's gonna go straight to the muscle, and you're gonna digest it better, like quicker, so that you're ready to go for the next session.
When a lot of our listeners will have youth athletes or teenagers that are going to do the hockey tournament, the soccer tournament, the basketball tournament, like these events over a number of days where you're playing 5-6 games, which is a lot, right? Twice in a day. Sleep's not the best because you're with your team and you're in a hotel or whatever else. So that's a really practical, great tip for them.
Yeah. And it makes it quicker too. So like I have so many athletes, when they travel, they bring rice cookers. So like, it's just a really easy thing to be able to make. Yep.
I've heard of blenders. And how do we feel about smoothies and things like that?
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah. Smoothies are
so thumbs up on that.
Yep.
And you're good with them getting some of their protein that way as well, like with the powder and...
Yeah, it depends. Like in terms of, and I shouldn't say depends. Like I mean, I work in high performance sport. Like we deal with supplements. Like that is, it's a part of the reality. Whenever I'm working with younger athletes, my go-to is, I should say regardless, my go-to is always food. Food first, where possible. Yeah. Protein powders and things have their place, absolutely. But where possible, like try food first. And then when when you can't meet those needs, or again, it's like foods are unsafe. So dealing with beach volleyball, these, they're in a lot of countries where food safety is an issue. So we used, a lot more like packaged options. So it definitely has its place. So we'll use those as well. But if we're going back to kind of, again, cooking at home and that sort of thing, certainly like where we can use kind of regular, options, dairy-based options are great. So like Greek yogurt, super high protein,
in the
cheese.
smoothie, or just eat it in a bowl with a bunch of other stuff.
And I'm assuming ideally without sugar. It doesn't matter.
Depends. So again, needs of the athlete. So if you're talking about an athlete that's working out, again, having two games in a tournament in a day, fast acting sugars right afterwards. So you actually want things that are going to be absorbed really more quickly. And so again, that's a lot of, especially the work I'm doing with younger athletes and a lot with their parents is kind of re-educating them around, okay, when are certain things okay? Because, we get this mindset that sugar is always bad. But as an athlete, there's certain times where it's actually pretty important that you're getting fast carbohydrates, like when they're training, like we need those things.
It's a good conversation to have.
Well, and those things in isolation, right? Yeah. So the sound bites through the internet that are good actual pieces of information, but how do you apply it appropriately is really where somebody like you comes in.
Yeah, putting it in context.
Totally. Like that's...
And coming up with a plan.
Yeah. Oh, so back to your question about so food preparation. So so it could be white rice. It could also be, and I did want to touch on this, definitely we're not suggesting that everything should be. So where possible, whole grains are amazing. So if you can prep quinoa, if you're doing a whole grain rice. So those are options as well. And I usually say to the athletes, if after your last workout, now you've got a day to recover. Like that's where we want our whole grains coming in. So get your whole wheat pasta, get your quinoa, your farro, your bulgur, like all of those types of grains. So again, and I always tell athletes cook up a whole sheet of potatoes, or do a big bowl of or a big pot of rice or quinoa, because they always think like, oh, I got to get home and now I've got to cook this up. And oftentimes those are the things that take the longest. And so those are the things that get kind of like put off to the side, and they just grab a bag of crackers or something instead. And so I always remind them, like, you can do these things in batches and keep them in your fridge and then just reheat it when you get home.
Use it all week.
Yeah. So it's that kind of thing. And then the last component is, vegetables. The more, like, our kind of rule of thumb is the darker and the brighter the color. It's just an easy way to know you're getting kind of the most nutritional value generally. Like more antioxidants and polyphenols, those tend to give the plants dark and bright colors. So it's kind of an easy one to do, and just try to get as many colors as you can. And then you don't have to worry about looking everything up and trying to, get all your it's just, it's easy. And that's a big part of my job is, again, that's why we use the plate method. Instead of getting people to focus on counting everything and logging everything, like, look at your plate.
I do have a lot of athletes that I'm coaching, especially the females. I would say 100% when we send them for blood work, they are low in vitamin D and they are low in iron. Yeah. So obviously then we're saying, you have to supplement, you need to do these things. How do you feel about, there's a competition coming up. Some of them are then going to IV. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So we are currently in the midst of working on a high performance strategy, like a national document in Canada for iron, because it's just been, everyone kind of does their own thing. And and it's been the Wild West for like 10 years. And finally we were like, this is crazy. We need to come together, because there is research to support these things, but there's no real consensus statement. So that is in the works. It takes a long time because you're dealing with, getting agreement from everyone, but it will be quite a robust document. So I'm very excited for when that does come out. But part of it was this strategy of knowing, like, okay, when you get an athlete who's iron deficient, like, what are the steps you need to take? Because again, every practitioner kind of looks at it differently. And so we wanted everybody to kind of come to an agreement. So kind of spoiler alert, or I guess kind of a preview to what's coming out, is we've developed this flow chart where it's like, you see an athlete who's iron deficient, what's the very first thing you do? Not put them on a supplement, is get them to see a dietitian, get them to actually review their diet, because the supplement is going to fix it for a time period. But if they're just continuing to do what they're doing, you're likely going to have them slide back down. So we also want to see, one of the things that's come out more in the past kind of 10 years with the surgence of low energy availability and relative energy deficiency in sport, knowing that like those are two big concerns with athletes when they're not eating enough, is that can sometimes, low iron sometimes can mask that. So when you have low energy availability, oftentimes it, like one of the secondary issues is low iron.
Sense.
So if you're just if you're just correcting the iron and not taking a look at the athlete's diet, you could be missing the actual cause. So that's why we say it's really important to look at like the overall picture of the athlete's diet. And if it is just that, again, they have high training volume, they're more susceptible, there could be family history, and they have a pretty good diet, but it's just not enough, then we go, okay, let's, clean up what we can, but let's look at, an iron supplement. If it is a low energy availability issue, there's a whole lot more work to do. So it's really important they start there. After that, then we would look at moving to a supplement. And then same thing, you've got kind of variety of different options out there. And then it's also about knowing how to take it well. So, I have athletes that are told so many different things. And what we know now is, there is a kind of training window after training where absorption is actually quite good. So we were always told them, don't ever take, iron after your training, because you get this hepcidin response, which is a hormone released by the gut that blocks it. Now we know there's about a 30-minute window where you can take it. So I've switched a lot of athletes to taking it right after they finish training. But for some athletes, they prefer it in the morning. Issue with that is a lot of people drink coffee and have dairy in the morning, and those are two inhibiting factors with iron. So that's a challenge. Then we'd have other athletes that would take it at night, but oftentimes they're training at night, and hepcidin peaks right after training, and it actually increases all throughout the day. So again, like these are things that, if they're getting something from their family doctor, no fault of their family doctor, they may not be up on all of this stuff. So they're just got told take an iron supplement and go. So the amount of athletes who come through my door and are on an iron supplement, but their iron is still low, often comes back to the way they're taking it. So so it's about timing. And then we want them again to be separating it from caffeine and dairy where possible. Don't be taking your multivitamin with it or anything with a calcium supplement. Taking it with vitamin C is really important. That helps.
Okay. I've been saying that. And then as you were talking, so I do tell them to take it with vitamin C or something with vitamin C in it. And then I was like, God, what if that's a myth?
Nope.
So that is not a myth. Okay. Thanks.
I presume that the person that's got low iron has had a blood test to determine that. Is that
Yeah.
So the starting point?
Great. Yes. Great point. I was, kind of saying, okay, you've got diagnosed low iron, but that is actually before that stage is you really do need to do that. And I mean, we're very lucky with iron. A lot of micronutrients you can't test in the blood. Like the results aren't reliable. Iron is one that is quite reliable. Right. As an athlete, please do not go get your iron tested after your workout. So that gives false highs. So they may come back.
Makes sense.
Because ferritin, which we test to understand if iron is a high or low, is what we call an acute phase reactant. Right. And so what'll happen is when the body's in stress, it goes up. So also make sure you're not sick because that same thing can happen. So we often, with our athletes, we get something called CRP done at the same time, which is an inflammatory marker. That way we know if CRP is high,
it's a good test too.
The ferritin is not valid. So it's so that's something else you can talk to your doctor about if you're getting your iron tested, is just ask for the CRP.
Well, see, for something like this, what you're talking about is there's so many permutations. This is why we recommend people talking to experts, because if you get great information from somebody like yourself, who's an incredible professional in this area, it's for life. You've got it for the rest of your athletic career and beyond. And it's good information. So it's not like you don't have to necessarily see a professional once a week for the rest of your life. We're talking
it's like a check-in.
Yeah. And I just feel like it's so valuable. Like I've in this process here, this conversation, I've learned so much.
I always say to my athletes, I'm like, I know that I've done my job when you don't need me anymore. Because that is the goal. That's my role is I want to educate them so that they're capable of doing this. I don't want them to need me for, their entire career. And I'm really excited when I see, some of my Olympians, who were on the podium, recently in Paris, and like, they're like, oh, do you work with them? And I was like, well, I kind of do. I check in on them, to make sure everything's okay, but they're doing great.
And they're
people
eating
like
good food.
Heather and Sophie,
enjoying their food.
Yeah, they do it all themselves now.
That's a huge win.
It is a huge win.
Vitamin D is another thing. So let's just go into a couple of the supplement world, which we know. So vitamin D is one we have to supplement. The athletes need to supplement it.
Yeah.
What do you say for amounts, sources? Do you want the DK? What are you talking to them about?
Yeah. So D is one of those ones that, it's, when anybody asks me, like, what's the supplement you always recommend? Like, hands down, it's vitamin D. Or
unless we can go to Mexico like you just were. Okay. I choose that. But realistically, I'm going to have to supplement. Yeah. Okay.
So, and like any supplement, and I find creatine falls into this too, like, they're very cheap supplements. So unfortunately, supplement companies can't make a lot of money on them. So they start making all these crazy claims about all this stuff that you need to do and all these formulations. And similar to creatine, where we say just go with creatine monohydrate, basic. Same with vitamin D. You don't need a fancy one. Okay. Just get the basic. I usually say to anyone, get a tested product, just because
of course.
It is an unregulated market, and you can be getting chalk in a pill. So get something that's actually regulated. But honestly, it's an inexpensive supplement. Vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, so good to take it with a meal where you're going to get a little bit of fat in it. But honestly, most people absorb it quite well. And then if you really want to know, a general recommendation is kind of 2,000 IU per day over the winter months. So from October to April, if you're living in Canada, that's the time when the sun is not strong enough to produce vitamin D in the skin. And if you're a heavy sunscreen user, so this was one of the things I actually ended up having a talk the one year earlier on with our beach volleyball physician. They were like, they're outside, we don't need to test them. I said, we're telling them to be super sun safe and wear all the sunscreen. We can't expect. And it was so funny because as soon as we tested them, like half of them were low. Wow. So if you're really careful in the sun, like I still encourage people, like you might need to continue to take it through the summer. One thing I do encourage people to do, and it's unfortunate that it's not covered anymore, is at least get a baseline done of your vitamin D, because I have seen such varying levels in athletes across the 10 years that we've been doing this. And, to the point where I had an athlete, like a normal level is 70 and above. I had an athlete at 15 one time. And
awful.
Yeah, we're like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
and she was having all of these issues. And,
Of course.
we're like, wow, okay, this is vitamin D related. It was really crazy. But everybody's a little bit different. And like iron, vitamin D is one of the ones that's actually reliable. So if you're open to spending the $30 or $40 to get it done,
tested.
I always say,
Worth it.
get
Yes.
the baseline test, and then you actually can titrate the amount based on your starting level. So general kind of rule of thumb, but again, consult your physician or dietitian or whoever you're working with. But 1,000 IU will generally move your level somewhere in the range of about 10 to 20 milligrams per liter in your blood. So depending on where you're starting, we can, we can move it up or down based on that. So if my athletes are below 70, they'll get a higher, dose. And if they're looking at, their levels are pretty good and we're just maintaining through the winter, we may only use, 1,000. So it just really depends.
And should that baseline be sort of like in August or something like that? Because you've had a summer of being outside and you'd think that would give you your natural vitamin D level?
So it's a really good time to do it. We would generally check in the fall and kind of see like, okay, how are you coming out of the summer? If your levels are good, we'll put you on a maintenance. If they're not good, okay, we know you really didn't absorb very much and we need a little more. And generally a darker skin individual, they have more melanin, which kind of blocks it. So so the darker your skin,
They might need more.
likely you're going to need.
Wow.
But I've seen varying amounts. So it's enough to say, hey, you got to get your test done and just,
don't guess, just go and do the test.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. Such great information, really practical stuff, like lots of nuggets that for me, I like. I like them. I think our listeners and viewers will as well. So thank you so much for coming and educating
I'm
us.
going to start my meal prep this weekend.
Yeah.
We
after
are
it's
on
late.
it.
There we go.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Bowls
That was
for everyone.
fantastic. Bowls everywhere.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Totum Wellness Podcast. Please follow us on Apple, Google, or Spotify and leave a 5-star review and comment. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel and please spread the word to family and friends.